Hello and welcome. My name is Tina Peters. I am a member of the League of Women Voters, and I will be serving as the moderator for this portion of the Candidates Forum. This portion of the forum is for the office of State Assembly District 71. Members of the State Assembly serve 2-year terms. For the August 14th primary election, there are 9 candidates. 2 of the candidates, Patrick Teston and Robert Steinke, could not attend tonight due to prior commitments. The remaining 7 candidates are seated before you in alphabetical order. The candidates have received the information regarding the format, time, and terms for this forum, and you have heard those terms for the prior portion of the forum. As a reminder, candidates are asked to keep their remarks germane to the questions and fair to the participants. The moderator reserves the right to interrupt to ensure that these ground rules are observed. Again, candidates will respond first to questions submitted by the League and then questions from the audience. If you want to submit questions to the candidates, please motion to one of the ushers for an index card and pencil. Questions should be addressed to all candidates and not to an individual candidate. The usher will collect your question for the moderator. The League reserves the right to review and screen questions for relevance and to avoid duplication. After the forum, please feel free to meet with the candidates. We now begin with a 2-minute opening statement from each candidate. We will begin with Andrew Beveridge.
Good evening, and I'd just like to thank the League for hosting this event. It's a great opportunity for us to meet people in the community. My name's Andrew Beveridge. I'm 30 years old. I was born and raised here in Stevens Point. I graduated from SPASH in 2000 and went on to UW-Madison where I studied philosophy and graduated in 2004. In 2006, I decided to attend law school. And I was given a book that had advice for prospective law students by one of my friends. And I read it, and it suggested that you ought to know what type of law you want to practice before you go to law school. And looking back, it's terrible advice. But I didn't know that at the time. And my mother, who's sitting here in the audience, she's worked for nearly 40 years at CAP Services. And she instilled in me the idea that in your career, you shouldn't do something just for money. You should do something because you believe in it, because you feel a moral purpose in the work you do. So I decided that I wanted to study environmental law. And I went to Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland, Oregon, which has the #1 environmental law program in the country. But I always knew that I would be coming back here to Wisconsin to pursue a career in environmental protection. Now, the economic events that unfolded while I was a law student have made it awfully difficult for young attorneys to find work. So I've been taking it upon myself to find other opportunities to have a positive impact on the community. In April of last year, I was elected to the City Council, and I represent the 1st District of the City of Stevens Point. I've since been appointed Chairman of the Finance Committee, and I've been volunteering with Portage County Legal Aid for about 1.5 years, helping low-income clients with family law issues. And I've also volunteered with programs such as Farm Shed and the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. When the opportunity came along to run for State Assembly, I looked at it as just a further step and a further opportunity to give back to the community and have a positive impact. Thank you.
We will now hear from Laura Hauser-Menting.
I'd like to start out with thanking all of you for being so involved in your community. Come out and meet all of us. The League does this great service to the community, and you guys are the participants that make all this worthwhile. Now, my name is Laura Hauser-Menting. Andrew started out with his age, so I'll start out. I'm 40 years old. Now, I came down to Stevens Point 5 years ago in 2007 because I chose this community. I did my research. I have 2 kids. They were in middle school at the time. I looked for good school districts. I looked for an area that had the same kind of values that I've had my whole life, especially when it comes to environmental standards and just the sense of community that there is. Now, I came back to get my bachelor's degree as a returning student, a non-traditional, and this was the place I chose to be. Now, as I came down here, I've already been involved in my state, and I, of course, became involved in my community. I've participated in different groups. I've worked with different businesses because I do some consulting, but these are the places with the values that I absolutely love. Now, My experience comes from a varied experience. I've worked with a W-2 steering committee when we implemented AFDC to W-2. I've had my own small businesses. I've worked with environmental causes, so I have a really nice cross-sectional background, real estate, insurance, business. Now I want to bring that to help the community in a different way. I've always been one of those people that have stepped up and helped on the small level. And the most recent activities that we've had in our state has hurt me personally in my heart. This is not what Wisconsin is for. We stand for bigger things than this. We stand for progressive ideas, and I would love to be your representative that will take this to the next level. Thank you.
The next opening statement will be from Corey Laddick.
Good evening. For those of you who don't already know me, I'm Corey Laddick and I'm running for the State Assembly. Although my primary work experience is in private sector business, I also have experience working in the government, so I understand both how the private sector works and also how the government works. My government experience, I was a legislative assistant in Madison. I was also a congressional intern for Congressman Ron Kind, who happens to be our new congressman for this area after redistricting. And I also have experience working inside a federal agency. I believe that this combination of experience, as well as experience being a teacher, will make me a very effective legislator that can really see things from multiple perspectives and that will be able to understand issues from practical experience rather than just what looks good on paper or what sounds good. But I'm not just running because of my qualifications. What originally got me interested in government was at the age of 13 when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And at that time, I saw so many issues that were affecting people with diabetes that were simply just too important to ignore. So I became an advocate for diabetes issues. I wrote lots of letters. I made several lobbying trips to Washington, D.C., and this was when I was only a teenager. I wasn't even able to vote yet. But I understood how government decisions affected people, and I got involved. Now fast forward to today, and I once again find a situation that is impossible to ignore, and that situation is the situation in our state. I see an economy that makes it difficult for people to succeed. I see healthcare that people can't afford. I see higher education that's becoming increasingly out of reach. And I see a K-12 education system that is really feeling the burden of less state support coupled with more unfunded mandates. I realize that it's never an easy process to push for change, but nothing will shake my determination as your representative in the State Assembly.
The next opening statement will be from Jerry McGinley.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Jerry McGinley. First, I also want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for holding this forum this evening, and it's good to see so many people here. I've never been on this side of the table before, and I can tell you the view is spectacularly different. I'm looking forward to answering a few questions later. My opening statement is going to be very brief, and it will be a partial explanation of why I'm running for office. I know that many of you are here tonight to try to answer the question of whom you're going to vote for on August 14th. I'd like to add another question to the mix, and that is, what kind of government do you want to see in Madison? The kind of government that I've observed, particularly over the last year and a half, and prior to that, is not the kind of government that I'd like to see for this state. Because I do believe that we can have good government that will think long-term rather than to the next election, that will always be thinking about how we can make this state a better place for our children and their children that come after them. For that to happen, the party politics and the divisiveness must end. It's hurting our state. While each political party certainly has different ideas about the role the government should play in our lives, there is always common ground from where to start. And we need legislators who will seek out that common ground, who will listen to each other, and then will work hard to find solutions that will benefit everyone. And that's part of the reason that I'm running for the Assembly. Thank you.
The next person is Hans Schmidt.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hans Schmidt, and I want to give you a little idea of where I come from. I'm a local. I grew up in Almond. If you guys know where that is, real small. We've got a highway sign. That's about it. I graduated high school from there. I went off to the Army. I served for 8 years. I went to college at UW-Stevens Point. I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. When I was at UWSP, I worked in the student government there, and we worked on a lot of different things. A lot of it was sitting on committees and writing a lot of legislation, which is not too different from what this job takes. And right now, I'm working for one of those community justice programs you heard all about from the district attorney candidates. We try to help multiple OWI and drug offenders get past what's making them go out and continue to drink and drive, really help them get back into the community and address the problems they're facing. I've always cared about my community, and I've always wanted to be involved in my community and try to be a leader. My experience ranges from scrubbing out porta potties in 140-degree weather to leading a company of soldiers to writing legislation to working in a biochem lab. What I've always gotten out of everything I've done is that everything needs to be in moderation. And I'm copying Jerry a little bit here when I say we need to work with everybody else. I'm not just here to support Democrats, I'm here to support Republicans as well. If we can work together, if we can find common ground, we're not going to be able to move forward as a society or a community. It's not glamorous by any means, and it's going to be hard work, but it can be done, and that's why I'm here. Thanks.
The next opening statement is from Katrina Shankland.
I'd also like to extend a thanks to everyone both in the room and the league for organizing this. I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Katrina Shankland, and I'm a passionate progressive who's already been representing you in many ways since Scott Walker came to power. I started in Stevens Point working at the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. I started out helping administer a $5 million grant from the Department of Energy. And from there, I moved on to working on green jobs, credentialing, and skill training in solar training markets throughout the Midwest. So I saw on a first-hand basis what Scott Walker started in this state and is continuing to do. He started by attacking sustainable transportation and renewable energy. Those attacks continued on with Act 10, collective bargaining against public employees, taking that away, trying to attack the unions, as well as attacking the environment, taking 2 devastating cuts from our education, higher ed, and K through 12, and attacking our access to Badger Care. I don't think any of these things should be political, but the Republicans and the far right have politicized them, and I feel it is my duty to represent all of you in Madison to make sure we have access to affordable health care, jobs that are family supporting, union rights to not only organize, but to also collectively bargain with employers for a comfortable and safe workplace and fair wages. None of this should be an issue, but it is, and I'm here to tell you that it's going to get ugly in Madison. In the Assembly, there's a Republican majority, and they won't listen to any of us when we get there, but I'm willing to do that work. Now, I have a background. I worked for 2,200 hours organizing the recall. I have a degree in political science. I followed every single bill from start to finish in the last few legislative sessions, and I'm here to work for you. I have passion, but I have knowledge, experience, and I have the drive to do what it takes to knowledgeably make the hard decisions, not the easy ones. Thank you very much.
The last opening statement will be from David Verhage.
Good afternoon, early evening. I'm David Verhage. I too would like to thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum, you all for being here, and my wife Debbie, who is supporting me in this career change I'd like to make. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a certified public accountant. I know finances, I know tax law, both individual and corporate. I've been the chief financial officer at Hirschner's for over 25 years. I've put together budgets, balanced ones, and hopefully on the good side of balance. I know what it takes and the difficulty making payroll when things aren't going so well. I'm also a District 4 director of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation and also sit on its Parks and Recreation Committee. The environment and our resources are important to me. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I served aboard the USS Wichita during the Vietnam War. Was in the Naval Reserve, so I only had 2 years of active duty, all on the USS Wichita. Part of that was 6 months off the coast of Vietnam, refueling carrier groups at sea. I think my experience in financing and being in industry will be helpful in the assembly. And that's enough. Thank you.
We will now move to the questions. Each speaker will have 1 minute to respond to each question. And for the first question, we will begin with Corey Laddick. Many candidates talk of reaching across the aisle and building bipartisan leadership. What skills, experience, or strategies do you have to improve the political environment in Madison?
Okay, well, I guess one unique experience that I have is I have worked with multiple cultures. I was an English teacher in South Korea for a year, had to work with other Korean teachers, primarily Korean teachers. So I do know what it's like to work with people who have a different perspective, so I think that's one asset that I would have. I also think that we do have to look for some win-win situations. I continue to be very progressive in my goals, I always have been, but I'm also a little bit realistic in how we're going to accomplish some of those goals. One example is education. I think that both Democrats and Republicans should be able to agree on some of the things that we can do to reduce unfunded mandates, such as having to print school board minutes in the newspaper. It would save $7,000 a year. That's a good win-win for everybody. It's something that Democrats and Republicans should be able to agree on, and that would ensure that the limited amount of resources that we have for education can actually go to education. So I think it's looking at issues like that. Okay.
Next, Jerry McGinley.
Okay, trying to remember the question.
I can repeat the question.
I got it.
Okay.
A little bit of my background, because I haven't touched on that at all. I'm almost 50 years old. I have served on numerous nonprofit boards in this community. We've lived here for 11 years, and in communities where we have lived in the past. Some of them have been highly controversial, contentious boards. You learn a lot about bringing together different viewpoints when you're trying to find common ground and reach some success that everybody's happy with. That's practical experience. I have a family. You don't raise children and be married for 27 years truly without understanding how to talk to people, listen and respect. As far as a strategy for once you get down to Madison, there are certain issues that I'm very passionate about, which you'll find out perhaps later. Public education, the environment, jobs, and I think it's important that the first thing I would do, especially in public education, is I'm going to look at voting records of everybody else in the assembly. I'll be looking at their websites to see where they stand on things like public education, and if I think there's a niche there, I'm going to be reaching out to them and trying to form partnerships, collaborations, so that we can start to bubble up some of the things that we think are important to help move the state forward together, regardless of what party affiliation we have. Thank you.
Hans Schmidt.
In my experience, I've had to work with a lot of people I don't particularly agree with very much. When I was in the Army, I've always been a little bit more liberally leaning, but we work with people that have a wide variety of different opinions. So we've had to come up with solutions, get through problems where we haven't had a lot of resources, haven't had a lot of backup, but sitting down, coming to a conclusion, and doing so fairly quickly. And I think I can bring that same sort of problem solving to Madison, hopefully with slightly fewer explosions going around me as well.
Katrina Shanklin.
Consensus building is certainly important. It's especially important in committee. It's also important to ensure that in the caucus, we understand exactly what the bill even is. Let me point out that many of these bills, the legislation that assembly people talk about, nobody even reads. So they'll, for the mining bill, for example, they'll say, oh, it's fine. It's a few hundred pages, AB 426, but it's fine. I'm sure we've always done mining, so why not? Well, I'll say first and foremost, I will read the entire thing. I will ask for your input. and then I'll find the people who not only agree, but also might have some suggestions, some edits, some amendments. My experience, I ran an international education and development nonprofit, 10 programs in 12 countries, from Mauritius to Egypt to Mexico to Panama to Thailand. I spoke with people who did not have English as their first language, and I managed them both on the ground in country and from Wisconsin. I have the experience that it takes. It's going to be difficult. I'm willing to do that, but I'm not going into it with my eyes closed.
David Verhage.
Being the Chief Financial Officer at Hirschner's, I've negotiated a number of different contracts, or been part at least of negotiating quite a few. And I think that skill will be beneficial in the assembly. I think being a financial person, a certified public accountant, CFO, I think I will have respect of the Republicans, and I think they might well listen to my opinions on bills and consider that opinion seriously, or consider those views seriously. Thank you.
Andrew Beveridge.
Being on City Council, I've had to deal with a number of issues that have been contentious, that have really sparked the passions of the community. And I found that what works best for creating, or coming up with good answers and creating consensus, is to move beyond the passion and the anger and get down to the details and the real information that surrounds the issue. And I think the council is typically very effective at that. I'd like to take that approach to Madison. Let's move beyond the slogans. Let's move beyond the misinformation and the abbreviated descriptions of what's going on and get down to the details. As Katrina said, it's incredibly important to go through the legislation in detail and understand what exactly it is you're dealing with. I'm in a good position as an attorney, as someone who's trained in the law to do that. But ultimately, when it comes to consensus building, I have my principles. I have my strong principles that I will not walk away from. But I don't wear them like armor. I don't have a chip on my shoulder. I can sit down with a conservative, a Republican, and find common ground. We share common goals. We disagree about how to get there. Within there's ability to come up with better solutions.
Laura Hauser-Menting.
Now, the consensus building is a big thing. It's one of the most contentious things that's happened in Madison this whole time, is we've had left and we've had right. Now, my experience in working with the W2 Steering Committee, I was the chair of that. I had everybody from the county board chair, city council, business members and things. Sometimes we had to drop our different chairs and remember what we were doing on that. Now I've led that. Now I've also been the governmental affairs and the PR committee chair for the Central Wisconsin Board of Realtors on our committees. You know, realtors have lots of different ideas for different things, but you know, we have to get on board and you have to bring people together. Now I've also worked on statewide committees for domestic violence. We actually sat down not only just keeping the voices of women in legislation, but making sure that women knew that they were important in these things. I've already sat down with both sides. I've already worked with many different groups on these issues, and this is not a new thing for me. Your voices are the ones that'll be controlling these answers, though. That's where the difference is in my experience.
For the second question, we will begin with Hans Schmidt. Proposals have been presented for the legislature to change the school funding formula. Do you believe the formula for funding this public education needs change? What would you recommend to improve funding?
What's happened with educational funding has been terrible for our state, and more specifically for our children. They're not getting the money they need, though. $1.3 billion that was cut from an already struggling school system. There needs to be a way to restore that money. It had to go somewhere, it can be brought back. Now, I'm not just saying find all that money and throw it back at them and hope for the best. You go through, you talk to the teachers, the administrators that have been working these problems. What programs work? What don't? What needs attention? And we go from there, get money to where it needs to go specifically.
Katrina Shanklin.
Over the next decade, as it stands right now, we'll have lost $2.4 billion from our education programs, K through 12, higher education, including technical colleges. That severely needs to be addressed. In terms of property taxes, I would like an hour to talk about this, but we need to address the property tax cap. That does not, the statewide cap actually does not give local control to both city and county boards to levy the taxes they need while they're also losing shared revenue. I think we need at the very least to discuss that. I don't want to increase property taxes. I think there are other ways, in fact, to levy taxes. We need to look at corporate taxation when they're not giving us jobs. That's a start, but property taxes must be examined as well, and local control must be restored. Scott Walker essentially took that away. So that's the very first step, but I think that needs to start in committee, it needs to start in hearings, and we need to hear from both parents and teachers on the funding issue as well. Thank you.
David Verhage.
I think as industry is struggling, and so are many of the people across the state, for everybody to tighten their belts, at least, and including the school districts, it's going to, I mean, right now we're probably feeding as much as we can into that system, but I hope in the near future that this economy will turn around, and that's what we need to be working on to get it turned around. So jobs will increase, taxes will increase, and we can use that additional funding then and funnel it more into the school district.
Andrew Beveridge.
I think the formula for school funding does need to be changed. We need to stop letting so much of the funding for our public schools be channeled away through voucher programs to unaccountable private and parochial schools. I disagree that local control over property taxes is the answer. What that ends up creating is a system of haves and have-nots. There's a reason that the state collects property taxes and redistributes it to school districts. It's so that DC Everest doesn't have a gold-plated school district and Pittsville has a one-room shack with a wood-burning stove. There is a purpose for that. But fundamentally, we need to look at the overall amount that we're dedicating to our schools. It's been cut severely, it's been cut for years. We need to restore that funding. We have the money. I look to our correctional system, which has been growing at the same time our school systems have been shrinking. We need to ask ourselves, do we want to have state-of-the-art fantastic prisons, or do we want to have state-of-the-art fantastic schools? I say, let's go for schools.
Laura Hauser-Minting.
Now, the funding stream for our education definitely does need to be looked at and changed. The thing is we haven't looked at other areas. Our state income tax formula is regressive. Our bottom people pay more than our top people. Our secretaries, as Warren Buffett said, pay more than he does as the CEO. These kind of things need to stop. We need to pull some of this off of our taxpayers who are getting to be seniors and having more limited income, and remove that burden from them and look at other avenues, such as some services that haven't been looked at for taxes. We haven't had new services such as IT or some kind of scientific, industrial kind of things taxed. We don't even have a tax on these things. These could bring in over $100 million just by putting a basic tax on it. These need to be looked at. We've lost at least $635 a head for our kids. These are important things, and looking at new avenues and not the old ones, and trying to let's make a new wheel. It's not it. We need somebody innovative to go after that.
Corey Laddick.
Sure. To focus really on the issue of the school funding formula, right now it's what we would call an incremental budgeting strategy. So basically what each school district gets is based on what they've spent before and what they've always spent. I think there is a lot of consensus out there that that's not really fair to hold everyone to these different levels of state funding. So what's been proposed is to go more to a base, where you just say, how much does it really cost to educate a child, and then what should that number be, and then have everyone get a similar amount from the state. I think that makes a lot of sense, because under the current formula, you have some school districts that are allowed a little bit more fat, and other school districts that are really just down to the bone. I don't think it makes a lot of sense that the state should give one school district a lot of money to educate a child, and another school district hardly any money. The other thing that I would say about school funding is I'd like to see a restoration of the 2/3 funding formula. Now it's down to about half. That's something that also needs to change.
Jerry McGinley.
All right. The school funding formula that is currently being used was put in place in 1993. The idea was the legislature said the state will give the school district 2/3 of what they need in exchange for you keeping your property taxes down. That was the idea. Since then, the 2/3 funding has never actually occurred. So, and as Corey indicated, from 93, those spots that the school district started out at, that was the increment he's referring to. That's what they've been building on ever since. So yes, there has been a lot of outcry that those numbers that were settled on because they happened to be in existence in 93 were not necessarily fair. In 2000, there was a lawsuit that made it to the U.S. Supreme Court that almost overturned that whole funding situation, but in the end, the U.S. Supreme Court held it up. There is a requirement in the state constitution that we have public school districts and that we fund them as equitably as practicable. What we're seeing right now is there is an achievement gap between our low poverty districts and our high poverty districts. And it's also been shown that since the budget cuts went into place last year, already in this short amount of time, that achievement gap is widening. So definitely we need to do something about that school funding formula. We need to stabilize our school districts. And then if you want to start talking about school reform, we can do it then. Sorry, thank you.
They do get a chance to finish their sentence.
I was doing a really long sentence.
We will now move on to questions from the audience. Each speaker will have 1 minute to respond to each question. The first audience question is, each candidate has the programs he or she supports. Programs need funding, however, the state budget is not balanced. How do you plan to fund and support your priorities and balance the budget? We will start with David Verhage.
Well, again, I think what we need is to get the economy going again here in the state where the tax revenues are increased, and we can start looking at new programs and helping fund education again to a better extent. Thank you.
Andrew Beveridge.
I mentioned our correctional system earlier. Right now, the state of Wisconsin spends slightly less than 9% of its general revenue on corrections. Minnesota spends 2%, yet they have a similar or lower crime rate than Wisconsin, depending on which year you look at. We're in this situation. It's not an accident. If you look at the 90s, we got tough on crime. We had truth in sentencing. We had longer sentences. Everything the district attorney candidates talked about in terms of restorative justice, alternative justice programs, aggressive juvenile intervention. These are things we can do to keep people from being involved in the criminal justice system at $35,000 per year per prisoner. Another thing we can do is when I was working as an intern, a legal intern at the Environmental Protection Unit of the Department of Justice, they had 2 empty offices there because of a hiring freeze. Those attorneys cost the state about $120,000 a year. They bring in far more than that in forfeitures every year. And that's the same for tax collectors at the Department of Revenue, for other enforcement officials at the DNR. If you staff those positions, we can bring in more money without costing us nearly as much as they're bringing in.
Laura Hauser-Menting.
Well, I touched on this before with the education. The top things we still have is we need living wage jobs for our people, and we need to fund our education. Now, there are new and innovative ways to look at these things, and there's avenues we haven't used. We have to make sure that the minimum wage is up enough so someone can actually make a living on it. You know, $7.50 an hour is not supporting any families, not helping people be able to pay attention to their kids and help them in schools. We need to make sure that we do use these other ways of taxing and avenues we haven't looked at to make sure we have better wages for our people. And the investments in education helps bring those jobs along. Now, if we do investments in our human capital, which has always been a strength in Wisconsin, we will still be the leaders in the state. Right now we're at the bottom. We don't need to be there anymore. Switching over to a new paradigm, a new way of thinking, is the way that's going to bring us out of this. And those 2 things, jobs and education, are the top things to do and to make sure that we take care of.
Corey Laddick.
Okay, a couple of big things here. The first is budgeting is really all about priorities. And what you saw in the last budget You had a governor who said that the state is broke, we can't afford anything, we have to cut all this stuff. He then increased funding for transportation by about $160 million, actually transferring money from general purpose revenue into transportation. That was kind of unprecedented. So when you say that the state is broke, but yet you're increasing one budget by $160 million, I think that's something that needs to look at. The other area that I would look at is duplication between federal and state services. This is something that I experienced firsthand because I did work for the federal government, for the Export-Import Bank. And you know, we did a lot of great work. We provided the services that anyone in any part of this country would need. And then I also found out that the state pretty much duplicates them exactly as far as having a Department of Export Promotion, having multiple people that work there, maintaining offices overseas in places like Brazil. Really important work. It is, but it's already being done at the federal level, and there's no reason to do the exact same thing.
Jerry McGinley.
I'm going to ask you to repeat the question, please.
I will do that. Each candidate has the programs he or she supports. Programs need funding, however, the state budget is not balanced. How do you plan to fund and support your priorities and balance the budget?
I don't know. No, not a good answer. One thing I will say to start out with is that one thing I was really surprised to learn, because living in Wisconsin, I see the positive all the time. I don't know if folks here realize that in terms of overall fiscal health, even if you include our fully funded pension program, we are ranked 41st in the country in terms of fiscal health. So I think that we do need to pay attention to the idea that we do have a budget issue, we do have a long-term fiscal issue to be evaluating every time we make a budget decision. But yes, I do have things that I think are very important that I'd like to see funded. And I agree with Corey, budgeting starts with priorities. So obviously I'm going to be focusing on the things that I prioritize, but in looking towards more revenue, I don't think the answer is always to cut spending. I think we can increase revenue, and I think we can do that without necessarily increasing taxes, which is the scary thing. It was shown in 2009 that if you put $1 into the Department of Revenue audit people, you'll get $8 back. But they have consistently cut Department of Revenue personnel. You could also look at the sales tax, and right now there's a bipartisan committee looking at restructuring our income tax in this state. So there's a lot of things that should be looked at on the revenue side as well. Thank you.
Hans Schmidt.
One of the big things I want to be able to focus on is veterans benefits. Now, a lot of my friends, older people I've known in the VFW, are concerned about what's happening to their insurance, what's happening to their education benefits. The federal government is cutting a lot of that stuff. We all were railroaded into this post 9/11 GI Bill program, and it dramatically changed how much we're able to get in order to be able to go to school and actually get that funding that we need to be able to get that education. There's ways to get money for that stuff. Andrew mentioned the DOC. There are a lot of people in jail right now that shouldn't be in there, and it's expensive for not only us as taxpayers, but the people in jail too. These are low-risk people, and they don't need to be in there. I know because I'm one of the people that's doing these assessments that's saying these people are low risk. Get them out of there, let's save some money, get those folks the help that they need.
Katrina Shanklin.
State law requires that the annual budget be balanced, but we still carry a structural deficit. So from year to year, we're carrying huge amounts of taxes that haven't been collected, this huge deficit. 40% of the tax revenue we're supposed to be collecting every year is actually not collected because the Department of Revenue is not fully funded. Secondly, I'd like to point out, since the early 90s, we've been giving corporations millions of dollars in tax breaks. We've not asked them to be held accountable to what they said they're going to do, and that's give us long-term, full-time, family-supporting jobs. Now I ask, if we give the 2/3 of corporations in Wisconsin right now who do not pay any tax at all per year, those taxes continuing, how long will we continue to carry the structural deficit? It's time for them to pay a small tax that's reasonable, just like all of us. And I think that's where we can start. We need to increase our revenue, and it begins with looking at our corporate income tax. That committee that's meeting right now is not bipartisan. They're looking at a fair tax, which would make 100% of corporations no longer pay taxes.
The second audience question. The second question from the audience is, some do not want to expand Medicaid funding for low-income people, and Badger Care insurance for the uninsured is being reduced. Do you favor the states expanding or reducing these programs? We will begin with Laura Hauser-Minty.
Now, when I worked with the W-2 steering committee, we had an issue with these things before, so this is not a new issue. Now, that was during the Tommy Thompson years, so as a person who worked with those committees, I had worked with lots of people from the other side of the aisle. Now, this is a necessity. We have Obamacare that will be coming through, but we need to fill the gaps in between. I do stand behind these programs. We do need to make sure that people are taken care of with their health. It pulls burdens off of families while they're working, so people can have healthier families. We can be good community members. We could volunteer. We can do other things. Now, the money that should be going into these programs is currently being held back by the governor. He said he doesn't want to start implementing the work that was already put in place from the previous legislature to do the health care exchanges. We need to get this enacted. We need to get this moving. These aren't things that people can take for granted. Health care is something that everyone should have. We should be taking care of everyone. And my time's up. I thank you.
Okay. What? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad that this question was asked, because as somebody with a chronic health condition, I believe very strongly that health care is a human right. I think it's ridiculous that we're one of the richest countries in the world and we can't provide health care for everyone, and between 18 to 80,000 people, Americans, die every year from being uninsured. That's a moral tragedy. Now, one of the biggest issues that we're going to be facing with Medicaid is Obamacare, because part of Obamacare is to expand Medicaid and to give more money to the states. But the trade-off is that the federal government will pick up 90%, the states would pick up 10%. So basically the federal government would give us $9 for every dollar that we would spend on this expansion. Very important that we take advantage of that. That's a great deal. You can't find a better deal than that. But there are, of course, some people on the other side of the aisle that want to choose political ideology over common sense and turn down that federal money. I tell you, one of my #1 priorities as your state assembly rep will be to make sure that doesn't happen.
Jerry McGinley.
All right. Medicaid. 1 in 5 Wisconsinites is in some type of a Medicaid program right now. There's been an explosion in the last 10 to 15 years in the amount of our state budget that goes towards Medicaid. It's up around 13% of our budget now. So, it gets to be a thing where when you talk about the political parties and whether you're a Democrat or Republican, what's coming from here and what's coming from here, and what you believe inside is really right, and what you really believe that the government needs to do for the people. And yes, I believe that a safety net for health insurance for all people is critically important. So down here, I am, yes, whatever we can do to make sure that nobody in this state goes without insurance, children, older people in nursing homes, whatever it takes, I want them covered. So we have an issue. So if Obamacare, Affordable Care Act comes through and we have the funding we need, then, and our budget allows it, it's going to take a lot of work, though, with the fiscal health our state is in to make sure that what we want to do in here can really get done. But yes, it's entirely worthwhile to do it. Thank you.
Todd Schmidt.
Healthcare as a business model is probably one of the worst things we've done as a people. We need to get away from that decades ago. My mom got strep throat a couple of years back. She couldn't get it treated. All she needed was antibiotics, just a bottle of antibiotics. Couldn't afford it, couldn't get health care. Ended up turning into guttate psoriasis. So now she's got a permanent autoimmune disorder, and thankfully the treatment is UV lights, and she likes to garden. She shouldn't have that. I mean, we shouldn't look Obamacare, it's a very gift horse. Let's take Badger Care, change it to supplement Obamacare, don't duplicate services. It's a synergy thing. Put them together, make it work for everybody, and make it even more affordable and burden our people as little as possible financially.
Katrina Shanklin.
When everyone has access to affordable healthcare, the economy improves too. We need to look at this as a link. If you have access to go to your doctor however many times a year you need for preventative care and for treatment, you can start your own business. You can afford the cost of affordable healthcare, maybe a $100 copay or a $20 copay, depending on your prescription or your visit, if you have affordable health insurance. And that's what these insurance exchanges are doing. Scott Walker turned down $38 million in federal funds, just like the $800 million he turned down for high-speed rail, in order to not implement these health insurance exchanges until 2014. He's waiting for Mitt Romney to get elected. We should not be politicizing healthcare and our access to it. We can grow as an economy, and it's important to a community that everyone have access to affordable healthcare, and that starts with affordable health insurance. The UN declared in 1948 healthcare as a universal human right. The United States has a long way to go, and it starts with making sure the 29,000 people Scott Walker kicked off Badger Care this past year get access to it.
David Burbidge.
I have two close relatives that get assistance from the state on their health care, and I think, too, health care is a right, and we have to somehow support these people in their health care needs if they can't afford it themselves. And as far as the health care exchanges as they come, yes, we need to get those in place, and so this health care thing for everyone is accessible.
Andrew Beveridge.
Healthcare is a basic human right. Many families in Wisconsin are one major illness away from bankruptcy. We owe it to them to protect them from that risk. That means working with the federal government to implement the healthcare exchanges. It means working with the federal government to make sure that we have the money on hand to pay our 10% share of the expanded Medicaid coverage here in Wisconsin. We owe it to our children to make sure that they can get adequate health care so that they can perform well in school and grow into productive adults and citizens. But also we have to focus on public health, not just health care. We need to support programs that provide healthy food to our communities, like Farm Shed with the Greenhouse Project. We need to make sure our schools have the funding to provide robust physical education programs. We need to help out employers who want to implement programs where wellness programs and give discounts on their health insurance rates to employees who meet certain health targets. If we can reduce the demand for health care, we make it more affordable for everyone.
Each candidate will now have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. We'll begin with Jerry McGinley. And she's thrilled, I can tell.
Oh, heavens. Well, my closing statement will be short. What I said earlier in my opening statement about ending the divisiveness in Madison, the obvious question is, how do we get there from here? I may be idealistic, but I'm not naive. So, there are definitely reforms that are necessary before we can create a legislature in Madison that is the kind of government that we'd like to see. And believe me, since the 2 or 3 months that I've been involved in my campaign, I've started a list of things that I feel reforms that would be good to help get more people to run for public office, more good people to come out and run for public office, because we have a lot of obstacles to that in our political system. There need to be legislators elected who are willing to work across party lines, and there needs to be party leadership that is supportive of that. Through all of this, we can't forget that all of the true power in determining whether any of this happens, any of these things that I think would be wonderful for our state, it all rests with the voters. It all rests with who is elected. It all rests with who you choose to send down to Madison and be the type of representative that you want to see moving Madison forward. So it's up to us. It's up to us, the voters. So don't forget to vote on August 14th. Thank you very much.
Next is Hans Schmidt.
As many of us have heard our own doctors say, everything in moderation. It's as true for politics as it is red meat. When it comes to working with Republicans, with the Green Party, with independents, at the end of the day, we all have to sit down and talk about the issues that are facing us. No one person has the best idea. No one group has the entire solution to a problem that's going to be the best for everybody. Sitting down, talking through is the best thing we can do. There are very few problems that we as a human race can't solve. It's just us getting over our egos and talking about it and working through it. We need more politicians that do that. We need somebody that's willing to sit down and talk. There are so many issues that are facing us right now, and our people are suffering. And there are more. There's the 90% that are suffering, and then there's the about 10% that are doing pretty okay. Let's focus on them. Let's take care of our communities. Let's keep things local. Stop depending on huge corporate conglomerates to solve all of our problems. We can take care of our own community. There's no reason Stevens Point, Wisconsin should ever have to import food from anywhere else in the state. Got plenty of farmland around here. I bet we could grow all the food we need right here locally. Let's focus on each other. Let's focus on our community. If we focus on our community, then we'll be strong. But if we focus on everything else outside of our power, then we're doomed to fail. So let's take care of each other.
Katrina Shanklin.
In the past almost 2 years since Scott Walker and many extreme Republicans have come to power in the state Senate, state assembly, and the governor's seat, we have seen tens of thousands of jobs lost. We have seen attacks to Badger Care. We've seen attacks to senior care. We've seen attacks on family care, domestic abuse victims, women's access to equal pay in the courts, the regulation of our environment, including the way the power has been ceded from the Department of Natural Resources and the protection of our natural resources. We've seen women's access to reproductive health being attacked and denied. We've seen defunding of incredibly important programs that not only affect our communities, they affect our families, they affect the person sitting next to you. Now, my opponents have never once addressed workers' rights. They've never once thought to bring up women's rights. And I want to say, when it comes to rights, those cannot be conceded. There is no middle ground when I go to Madison and represent you in the assembly, because the far right has hijacked the Republican Party, stripped away our collective bargaining rights, our right to unionize in some cases, our right to talk to our employer about a fair workplace without fear of getting fired. They've not once tried to work to get jobs. In one special job session, they passed 57 bills negatively affecting women and families. It's so easy for me to stand up here right now and tell you that I'm going to go to Madison and be best friends with the Republicans, and we're going to do wonderful things for all of us. But that is not a reality. We are facing a devastating economic climate with Republicans who are not concerned about us, who are concerned about partisan politics. And I will be the person to find middle ground when there is some, but I want to say now, there is no middle ground when the middle class is being attacked. And I can capably and adequately and passionately and morally support and represent you in Madison, but I need your vote to do that. My ethics are firm, my campaign has been clean, and I run on clean government. I will restore what I can to the government as a clean campaign person who will be your next representative. Thank you so much.
David Verhage.
It's likely that the state assembly will continue to be controlled by the Republicans. I don't think confrontation is going to work well to try to get the Republicans to see the Democrats' point of view. I'd like to see the war between the parties to end. This constant battle isn't doing the voters and the taxpayers of this state any good whatsoever. And if were sent down to Madison, I would seek out the assembly majority leader, and I would try to meet with Scott Walker and tell him that the war, at least with me, will end, and I will try to work with you, and I hope you hear what I have to say and my views on things and consider them seriously as legislation moves forward.
Andrew Beveridge.
In the last several years, I've seen Wisconsin go in the direction of putting short-term political and economic concerns in front of the long-term concerns of our future prosperity 10, 20, 30, and 40 years down the line. We've let corporate interests come in here and come within a whisker's breadth of gutting our environmental regulations related to mining. And why? Because they say they can't operate profitably unless we gut those regulations. That's like GM saying, we can't operate profitably unless we stop installing all this safety equipment on our vehicles. That's not acceptable. I'd say they have to go back to the drawing board. We've been cutting our schools. We've been cutting the UW system. It's now $10,000 a year. It's more than $10,000 a year for in-state tuition at Madison. This year, it's the first time ever it's going to be more than $10,000. We end up loading our students up with so much student aid that or student debt that they can't afford to buy a house. They can't afford to start a business. They enter the economy and they can't even participate in it. We share these concerns. We're all Democrats. We're all progressives. I think really what it comes down to is who do you trust to be more effective to put these ideas into practice? With my legal training, I can work with complex legislation. I understand the administrative procedure, the procedure that takes statutes and turns them into regulations through the state agencies. I understand the legal challenges that rulemakings and statutes can face. I can stand up and say, when we have something like the voter ID bill come through, say, I think this is probably unconstitutional, not only being bad policy. Even if we pass it, we'll end up spending hundreds of thousands of dollars defending it in court, and it'll probably fail anyway, which is the result we want in the first place. But still, we ought to be able to get there without having to spend all that money in court. I think with my experience in city government, my training as a lawyer, I think I'm ready to go down to Madison and hit the ground running and be effective at creating the changes that all of us are talking about. I'm asking for your vote on August 14th to let me do that.
Laura Hauser-Menting.
Now, a lot of the things that we've talked about have been details about a lot of things, but the most important things is the stories that come from you, the people that actually are the reason why we want to go down and be a representative. Now, the stories that I've listened to haven't just been within the few recent years with the current state of affairs in Wisconsin. I've been actually working on different levels and different groups and different things since the early 90s, and even when I shut down my high school in Crandon one time with a protest against the Crandon mine. So I've been active. The thing is I've worked my way up helping people at different levels and haven't seen the right amount of change that I've wanted to see. I've helped candidates get elected. I've worked on legislation through different groups. And the thing is when I came down here, like I said, I chose this community because it has the same kind of values that I have. Now, I had worked for Louis Malewski in the last campaign that he had, and I got to talk with more people. And I thought, that's what kind of thing I want to do, is make sure I get good people elected. Now, when Louis stepped down from his spot, that was a game changer for me. Someone else with those kind of values has to step up and go down to Madison and take your stories that I've been listening to this whole time and make sure Madison knows that we here in this county have different ideas than just left and right. Now, I've been working with people on both sides of the aisle. I have people who support me that identify as Republicans, as independents, as progressives, and as Democrats. That's what we're here for, the people that are behind us. And I want to be that strong representative for you and take your voices down to Madison and make sure your ideas and values get taken down there. I would appreciate your vote on August 14th, and thank you very much for listening.
And Corey Lennick.
Okay. Well, like I said before in my opening statement, my start in politics was really as a concerned citizen trying to influence elected officials. And I believe strongly that the best thing that ever happens in our democracy is when somebody is able to speak their mind, to share their thoughts with a government official or with an elected official. And certainly hearing people's concerns was my favorite part of my government experience, both working as a congressional intern in Washington, D.C., reading the letters, taking the phone calls of people who have an issue, who have something that they're concerned about. It was also my favorite part of working down in Madison as a legislative assistant. And it's been my favorite part not only of this campaign, but of my last campaign when I ran for this seat 9 years ago. So that is why I think, having regular listening sessions, actually reading the letters that people send to you, these are very strong priorities for me. So that being said, if any of you have an issue that you would like to talk about, please don't hesitate to talk to me. I'll be around after the forum, and I promise you I'll stay for as long as there are people willing to talk to me, because it really gives me a great insight into sometimes some issues that I wasn't aware of. Some examples, I've had state employees who have talked to me about ways that they can save the state money. And those are really great things to know, ways that we could save the money with the state contract process. And that's one of the reasons why I was so disappointed when our governor said that he wasn't going to meet with state employees when he was trying to solve the budget crisis. Seems to me that the first thing that you would want to do is talk to the people who are in the trenches and say, all right guys, how are we going to save some money? I've talked to a lot of people who are concerned about losing their jobs with Skyward. A lot of people work for Skyward. So these are some of the things that I want to take your issues to Madison.
The League would like to thank all candidates for the time and energy they have invested in running for State Assembly District 71 and for participating in this forum. And the candidates and the League would encourage you to vote on August 14th. Thank you.